The mystery begins. A search of a rental home turned up evidence of a serious physical assault inside the house. Police finding bloodstains and spatter inside the garage and evidence of a cleanup. Last week, they revealed they found traces of her blood mixed with her estranged husband's DNA on the kitchen faucet. In New York, Laura Ingle, Fox News.
A conservative activist says it is outrageous that once again President Trump is being attacked over the idea of fake foreign collusion.
During a recent Oval Office interview with ABC's George Stephanopoulos, President Trump said he would consider accepting information on his political opponents, despite all the controversy related to Special Counsel Robert Mueller's investigation and the fake dossier.
I think you might want to listen. There's nothing wrong with listening. If somebody called from a country, Norway, we have information on your opponent. Oh, I think I'd want to hear it.
Trump went on to say if he thought there was something wrong, he'd maybe go to the FBI, but the Democrats and the left-wing media went totally ballistic, jumping on the president's words. During an appearance on American Family Radio, Gary Bauer of American Values says Trump should have asked Stephanopoulos, don't you think that's a question you should ask Hillary Clinton?
She's the one who in 2016 hired a foreign spy, Christopher Steele, to get dirt from Russia that ended up being lies to put into a dossier that then was leaked to the media in order to try to destroy my presidential campaign.
Bauer says so far the only foreign collusion that we know about is that which took place with Hillary Clinton's campaign and a number of foreign interests. I'm Chad Groening.
The U.S. House continues to work on an appropriations bill that so far damages the pro-life cause. But as Charlie Butts reports, the House won't have the last word.
As work proceeds, Oklahoma Congressman Tom Cole introduced an amendment that would preserve the conscience rights the Trump administration adopted for medical professionals who don't want to be death dealers. Carol Tobias of the National Right to Life Committee tells AFN Democrats are challenging it.
The appropriations bill would repeal conscience protections for healthcare providers who do not want to participate in abortions. Unfortunately, the Cole amendment lost, so the bill would still strip away conscience rights if this would actually become law.
Next, current rules ban Title X funds, grants for family planning or sex education from abortion providers.
So the House Democrats want to strip that provision so that one place, one site, can receive Title X family planning funds and also perform abortions.
Alabama House member Martha Roby submitted an amendment to retain the rules barring organizations such as Planned Parenthood from getting the money, but the House Democrat majority defeated it. This week, a vote should be taken to strip away the Mexico City policy, which bars use of tax dollars to organizations that promote or provide abortions. Regardless of its form, senators are likely to turn the bill down, and President Trump has vowed to veto it. I'm Charlie Buck.
For American Family News, I'm Steve Pugh.
My heroin addiction had me living in filth. The sole reason I got up in the morning was to get high. But at Teen Challenge, I broke free from the drugs. Now I have goals and dreams again, and that is an awesome feeling.
If you or a loved one are struggling with addiction, Adult to Teen Challenge can help. There are centers across the country, and you can find the one nearest you at 855-END-ADDICTION or at TeenChallengeUSA.com. This is Urban Family Talk.
She's sharp, pointed, and insightful. This is Stacy on the Right on American Family Radio and Urban Family Talk.
When President Trump kicks off his 2020 re-election campaign tomorrow night, he'll be doing it in downtown Orlando, holding a rally at the 20,000-capacity Amway Center.
Changing the asylum laws is an imperative. Building the wall is an imperative. Putting more officers and agents on the ground, that is an imperative, in getting judges and resources.
Take a look at the Democrats, though. They're walking away from Obamacare and saying, well, that wasn't enough. Now they want to do Medicare for all, which would eliminate 180 million Americans' private health insurance that they like.
And now, Stacy Washington.
Hey. Welcome. Thanks for being here today. We have just so much fun going on the program today. We're going to have Cassie Smedile. She's going to join us. And we're going to just chat about the launch. Yes, it's true. It's factual. The Democrats had been saying, remember when it was their mantra that he wasn't going to run again. He was tired. He hated it. He only ran. He never thought he was going to win, and he would never run for president again. He would never run for re-election. Do you remember when Democrats said that? I know it's a lot to try to keep up with the lies that they peddle on the regular, and Nincompoops Incorporated, they definitely keep the media busy with their press releases and their talking points. But we've got a fantastic story here, and that is that not only is the president running for re-election, but he's doing so at an advantage. And we know that because the polling has already begun to come up showing Bernie Sanders, who's not even the front runner anymore, a socialist, which Americans don't even want socialism. Americans don't like it. Americans have not really shifted largely towards socialism. Yes, millennials like toying with it, but they love their lattes and their custom cars too much. Yeah. They're going to use the same kind of methodology they used to tell us that Hillary Clinton had a 99 or 98% chance of winning. They're going to use that same methodology to try to convince us that Donald Trump is 9 points behind Bernie Sanders, which, by the way, is the margin that they oversample Democrats by. So if you actually just did a poll, a straight up poll where you took a third, or 40, 40, 20, 40% Democrats, 40% Republicans, and then 20% other politically unaffiliated independents, you'd have a much more accurate representation of what the voting electorate was planning on doing in another year. But why would we do that? That'd be fair, right? Why would we do that? What am I saying? What's that all about? Anyway, so we're going to chat about how far we've come in just 4 years. I have some audio for you from June 3rd of 2014. It's Morgan Freeman chatting with Don Lemon. And I know you're probably thinking, no, pull your hand back from that dial. You want to hear this because not only have we seen a complete metamorphosis in what is acceptable and what is conversation surrounding race and America, and really it used to just be America. Now everything is racial. The police interactions are racial. The politics in Washington, D.C. are racial. Everything's racial. But it didn't used to be that way. Even just those 5 years ago, because this is 2019, 5 short years ago, Don Lemon he wasn't radicalized back then. And so it's an interesting look we're going to have with that. And then, of course, we're going to chat about the Supreme Court refusing to rule on another wedding cake lawsuit. So you remember Melissa's Treats, I believe is the name of the business. Melissa's Sweet Shop. It's unbelievable. Sweet Cakes by Melissa has been fined a whopping $135,000, and the Supreme Court, instead of just striking the ruling down, has remanded the actual case back to the court that fined her. And they've ordered them to re-adjudicate the case in light of Masterpiece, the cake shop ruling that basically said they have to abide by the religious freedom that's enshrined in our Constitution. So we'll dig into that a little bit. And of course, call lines are open, 866-963-2037. So and WMD. You're probably thinking, Stacy, what are you talking about? There was WMD. You know how it's been drummed into our heads that there wasn't any? Well, there was. So Yahoo News is now reporting on it. So you got to go to the back ether, the deep underbelly of the internet, off into the hinterlands, not even the back 9, but way beyond that, to get the news breaking that turns out George Bush was right all along. Turns out this is just another Democrat talking point. So we'll dig into that too. But first off, so you guys know, there's just been this amazing book that we've been digging into. And the title of the book, it's the Little Women's Book Study that I'm a part of. We've been looking at this book called, it's A Shepherd Looks at Psalm 23 by W. Philip Keller. Now, W. Philip Keller is an actual shepherd, meaning in modern day times. So back when he wrote this book was in 1970s. He wrote this book. He was born in East Africa and always loved wildlife and the outdoors. He spent many years in agricultural research, land management, and ranch development in British Columbia. And then he later pursued careers in conservation, wildlife photography, and journalism. His experience as a shepherd equipped him with the insights that are the basis for this book. Now, it's by Zondervan Publishing, and it's been published many, many times. I happen to have one of the newer paperback copies, which, no offense, but one of my Bible study chicks, she shows up, and we're studying at a friend's house. And she shows up with 2 copies that she's been gifted over the many years. And both of her copies are hardcover, and they're beautiful. They're basically, they're older, not like this little paperback one that we all got. We only paid like $4 or $5 for ours. So, I mean, I can't complain, but her copy was so much prettier than ours. Now, in case you're wondering if W. Philip Keller only wrote about being a shepherd and wrote about Psalm 23, that's not true. He wrote At Splendor from the Sea, As a Tree Grows, Bold Under God, A Fawn Looketh the Frontier Preacher, A Layman Looks at the Lord's Prayer, Rabboni, which is to say Master, A Shepherd Looks at the Good Shepherd and His Sheep, A Gardener Looks at the Fruits of the Spirit, and on and on and on. It looks like about 40 books here. So what am I getting out of this? Well, first off, there's a whole lot about sheep that we, as, modern day city type folks, even those of us who maybe have, live in a rural area or have a farm or some animals or something like that, unless you actually own sheep, there's a lot about them that we don't know. And we are continually compared to sheep in the Bible because God is not just our shepherd, but He's our Father and our protector, and He cares for us. And to a great extent, human beings are very much like sheep in a myriad number of ways. Now, I've always heard that, and I've always understood, sheep need to be in flocks and sheep need to be tended to, and, sheep wander off. And you get all that. But this book goes deeply into the parallels between humanity and sheep. And it talks about how God is our shepherd. It's a 24-hour job. And shepherds, in general, their job is 24 hours. And it also, in the book, he goes into this beautiful, it kind of explains and expounds upon David, who was a shepherd. As a boy, he was a shepherd, and the kind of work that he had to do to maintain his flock. So I recommend this book highly. It's a very small book. It's 168 pages or so. You could easily read it in a couple of sittings, but if you're doing it as a study, there are a few resources that people have created online. His Vessel Ministries has In the Arms of God, Lesson 2 Application Assignment by Joe Hancock. And this one is, it's just a little teensy little, like front and back, half of a single sheet of paper that has fill in the blank answers that you can print out and use if you want to study with friends. So I wanted to share something from the book for today for the encouragement. And so he talks in the first chapter about us as human beings acknowledging God's ownership and headship over us. And he says it's no accident that God has chosen to call us sheep. The behavior of sheep and human beings is similar in many ways. Our mass mind or mob instincts, our fears and timidity, our stubbornness and stupidity, our perverse habits, these are all parallels of profound importance. Yet despite these adverse characteristics, Christ chooses us, buys us, calls us by name, makes us His own, and delights in caring for us. And it is this last aspect which is really the third reason why we are under obligation to recognize His ownership of us. He literally lays Himself out for us continually. He is ever interceding for us. He is ever guiding us by His gracious Spirit. He is ever working on our behalf to ensure that we will benefit from His care. And so there could be, perhaps you're in a very discouraging point where you've made a mistake and you just want to rewind the hands of time back and erase it. And the further you look into and dig and search for a way to erase or fix the mistake that you've made, the more you realize that it's just something that's happened and you can't undo it. You just have to move forward and try to make up for what you've lost, for what you carelessly destroyed, whatever the case might be. And so in that moment, and the moment being, you could have been struggling with this for weeks, and recriminations and regret and, the voice of the accuser literally bombarding you with, you did this, you don't deserve help, you don't deserve anything, this is what you deserve because look at the mistake you've made. Don't listen to that. That's the voice of the enemy, and it's meant to derail your progress and stop you from being able to get over this moment. Instead, you have to look at what God says about how He will take care of us. He takes care of every aspect of our lives. And when we make a mistake, instead of being, you would think he'd be angry or he'd be, look at this mess that she's gotten herself into. Instead, it's quite the opposite, where God is waiting, patiently waiting at the ready to assist us. He won't come in and force his help on us, but if we ask him, and it's as simple as saying, Lord, I've messed this up. I'm in the ditch. I can't get out. I need you. And then you can rely on him to work even the worst circumstances out for your good, which is impossible for us to see because not only can we not see around corners, we can't barely see what's dead in front of us. So trust him to rescue you because he will. And that is a continuing theme in this book. And so we have to search our own hearts and motives and our personal relationship with God and say, here are some questions that he gives at the end of that first chapter. He says, asking ourselves, do I really belong to him? Do I really recognize his right to me? Do I respond to God's authority and acknowledge his ownership? Do I find freedom and complete fulfillment in this arrangement? Do I sense a purpose and deep contentment because I'm under his direction? Do I know rest and repose besides a definite sense? Do I know rest and repose besides a definite sense of exciting adventure in belonging to him? He goes on to close out this chapter by saying, if so, then with genuine gratitude and exaltation, I can exclaim proudly, just as David did, the Lord is my shepherd, and I'm thrilled to belong to him, for it is thus that I shall flourish and thrive, no matter what life may bring to me. So that's the encouragement for today. I hope that's a blessing to you. Now, I want to hear, I know I'm getting close to the end of this segment, but I think we have enough time to listen to Morgan Freeman. He's chatting with Don Lemon on June 3rd of 2014. And this is YouTube gold, in my opinion. It's number one.
No, you can't say that. I don't think wealth, personally, I don't think wealth and genetics have anything to do with each other, actually. If you're born in the U.S., it really doesn't matter the condition of your birth. Mm-hmm. What matters is what you inherit from your nurturing, from your environment, whether or not you're going, I'm just from the standpoint of having been born with little. You can always get out of that. Say you're born as one of the untouchables in India. Mm-hmm. There you are. And if you're born into the super rich, there you are. Here, you can be born to the super rich, but 3-4 generations down the line, it's gone.
Mm-hmm. So he's explaining how in America, you can be born as he was in abject poverty, but he had a drive to succeed. And he used to sell things so that he could get into the movies, so that he could go and watch movies. And so the most important thing that we can take from what he said, and I have a little bit more for you, and we'll get to that in the third segment. We have Cassie Smedile up next. But the most important thing that you can take from what he said is that he recognized, being an American, that he could be anything. He could be poverty-stricken and one day be a multimillionaire and someone that everyone knows his name. And that's regardless of race. Interesting, huh? Because he's a leftist. And he's chatting with Don Lemon. All right, we'll be right back. Stay there.
The Ministry of Preborn meets abortion-minded women right where they are. When a young mom sees her baby on ultrasound, she's 80% more likely to keep her baby.
And I got to hear and see my baby for the first time. Hearing the heartbeat made me cry. And it was certain that I was going to keep my baby forever.
This mom chose life for her baby.
She's been such a joy. Her name even means rebirth and sort of being raised up from the ashes. I now see my daughter, and I cannot imagine my life without my happy, lovely, joyful, smart baby, and I'm so grateful.
Preborn runs and leads Christian pregnancy centers all over the country. To find out more, go to preborn.com. That's preborn.com, or dial pound 250 and say the keyword baby. That's pound 250 and say baby. Your love can save a life.
Hi, I'm Crawford Loritz with a legacy moment. Did you know leadership is not about status and position? It's all about responsibility. I have a friend who heads a Christian organization, and some time ago, that organization went through some very difficult times. It turns out that some of his staff, individuals close to him, made poor decisions that led to a crisis. But my friend refused to place the blame on anyone except himself. He placed it squarely on his own shoulders. I deeply respect him because as the leader, he owned up to the responsibility of that position. Many times, the stuff of real leadership is seen in a person's ability to take the heat. That's what happened in 2 Samuel chapter 24. David was a true leader. David blew it. He did something wrong, and the people were paying for it. 2 Samuel chapter 24, verse 17 says, Then David spoke to the Lord when he saw the angel who was striking down the people and said, Behold, it is I who have sinned. It is I who have done wrong. But these sheep, what have they done? Please let thy hand be against me and against my father's house. What a statement. In other words, David says, no, I'm not looking for a scapegoat. I'm not looking for someone to take the heat. I did it. I'm responsible. Those are refreshing words these days. Nobody wants to own the responsibility, but we all want to take the credit. What we do affects people around us, so we have to be willing to accept the blessings as well as the burdens. That's why a person should never be given a position of leadership until there's been proven character. Well, here's what I want you to remember today. Don't make others pay for what you've done. You're in leadership because you're responsible. So let's take the responsibility.
Legacy Moment with Crawford Loritz is produced by Moody Radio.
Welcome back to Stacy on the Right on American Family Radio and Urban Family Talk.
Welcome, welcome, welcome. Thank you so much for being with us today. Find out more at stacyontheright.com and afr.net. It's my pleasure to welcome good friend of the show, my buddy Cassie Smedile. She is the RNC Deputy Communications Director. Thanks for joining us today.
Hello, hello. Great to be with you.
Oh, it's so much fun to have the news that you're going to share, which is that Friday, in addition to being the president's birthday, was the official launch date of his 2020 campaign.
That's right. We call it our National Week of Training, and all of it is leading up to, of course, the big rally tomorrow night in Orlando, where, I mean, it feels like the president has never stopped, but he is officially launching his re-election campaign tomorrow night. I don't know if you saw that tweet, but they've got almost 100,000 RSVPs. So take that, literally anyone else who's in the race for president, you just can't compete with that kind of enthusiasm. People have been already lined up. 37 hours ahead of time, people were out there lining up for this rally tomorrow. It's incredible.
I know. Now, remember, I am a veteran of the 6 Mile march from Columbia, Missouri, when he came here to visit us, and we had to park across the highway and march. There were so many people, so much humanity marching at the same time, trying to get to this aircraft hangar, that it was news. It was news besides the fact that the president was in Missouri and Air Force One was coming and all that. It was such an experience. I mean, one thing I remember about that night, I'll never forget. It was really like early evening, early afternoon. When we got started, was just how upbeat and fantastic everybody was. And these were not people I'd ever met before, obviously. And everybody was just so great. So can you cast your mind back to a time when the president had been recently inaugurated and everyone started speculating? Everyone was saying that he wouldn't run again. He would not have the energy. He wouldn't have the desire because he never thought he would win in the first place. All that drama. Do you remember that?
Mm-hmm. I mean, it was wishful thinking on the part of his naysayers, but exactly the opposite has happened. I think he's only been further emboldened and further energized since he's gotten into office. I think he's got this great record to run on. He is pumped to get out there and start talking about it. This is someone who, most of us are exhausted just going to work each day. And the president, he gets out on these rallies, he's like, let's do another one. Let's add another one to the list, because this is where he drives his energy, actually being out with people, not being cooped up in an office. And it's incredible, and certainly he's got a lot of great things to share and say. And what's funny, you talk about that 6 Mile march. I love that. That's something where you can see, it's before an election. People are curious. They want to sort of be a part of the experience. That happens every single time a rally is announced. you get these lines that go on for hours and tens of thousands of people, and they have to have overflow spaces or put up huge screens outside. I mean, last week, there was a lot of news that President Trump and Joe Biden were both in Iowa on the same day. And conceivably, Joe Biden was supposed to be in the liberal part of Iowa, and he had his event at the same place that then candidate Trump had his event in 2016. And yet, Donald Trump had over 5 times the number of people that Joe Biden had last week in the, quote, liberal part of the state. This is not made up. This is not a fluke. This happens everywhere, and it's because what once might have been curiosity now has turned into people saying, I want to go out there. I want the president to know we support him. I want the president to know that we want him to keep doing and delivering for the American people. And I think that, again, is something that the media is getting wrong, Democrats are underestimating, and as we have said many times before, they're going to wake up the day after Election Day 2020 scratching their heads and asking themselves what happened yet again, but we'll know.
Yeah, well, we're already ready. I'm ready for that. I'm ready for all of it. In fact, last time I was so shocked to see people that I really respected, like Megyn Kelly looked like, a dear friend had passed away when they announced she's sitting right in the room that he was the president. And I thought, this can't be. She certainly, even though they've had their dust up and, they're not friends, surely she would be happy to see a Republican in office, but it wasn't the case. Now, in another kind of redo of 2016, we're seeing them already putting out polls, putting Bernie Sanders, a socialist, who doesn't even live like a socialist, but he's a socialist, putting him 9 points ahead of the president. Weren't they wrong last time? Why should we trust them again?
That's right, the multi-million-dollar socialist who got it through his millions through capitalist means. That's one of my favorite Bernie lines. But that's exactly, we know that the polls got it wrong on Election Day, so I don't really know why we're putting stock in any polling 500 days out. We certainly aren't here. What we do put stock in is we have our modeling, which shows us that there is in some cases, record high enthusiasm for the president's job performance. When you ask people, how do you feel the president's doing on issue after issue after issue, he's right side up. And then some momentum is in his favor because people feel the results of this administration. And so to couple that with what you see on the ground with tens of thousands of people, people take their vacation days to go to a Trump rally. Some families go to Disney World in the summer, other families go to Trump rallies, but that's what's happening in this country, and there's no one else who can compare to that enthusiasm and who can bring out the American people like Donald Trump does. And he's earned that, by the way, because he's delivering.
Yeah, I guess the younger people, younger than me, they always say they say this is or that is trash. So I got to, take their euphemism. Polls are trash. Like, we don't have any reason to trust them. And I do sometimes report on them when they have like an interesting twist, but it's just kind of like noting what the weather is, which knowing that the weather, it's dry right in this moment, but it was like seriously thunderstorming about 2 hours ago, and it probably will be thunderstorming again in 2 hours. So I can say it's dry now without anyone blaming me when it's pouring rain in like an hour. So that's what the polls are like. It's a snapshot, and depending on the sourcing, it could be a snapshot of a trash can. Like, we don't even know what their methodology was.
Well, that's exactly right. And oftentimes when you do look into the methodology, you tend to understand why they're going the way they are. They're just taking a random sampling of people on the street or people that are, yes, registered to vote but haven't voted. But what we also, the only way that we use polls around here is just on messaging. For example, if you say, how do you feel about Medicare for all? People are like, well, I don't know. That sounds pretty good. Mm-hmm. But then in terms of messaging, people say, how would you feel about Medicare for all? This would mean that the government would take over all of your health care, and they would run all of the decisions for your health care, and you might be limited, and yada, yada, yada. Your taxes would go up, all of that. From a messaging standpoint, you can get a very clear and frankly accurate picture about how people feel about a particular topic. But when you're talking about just put literally random Joe Schmo on a ballot, people don't know anything about that person. We haven't, on the Democrat side, they haven't even gotten on the debate stage. Imagine what things are going to look like in a couple of weeks after we've seen all of them go after each other on a debate stage. Right now, each of them have just had glowing reviews in the media, and it's just been mainstream media giving them infomercials, essentially. But when people really hear from them and really have an opportunity to hear where they stand on the issues and what they truly believe, that's when we're going to start to get a more meaningful picture that we should be paying attention to. And conversely, with President Trump, people have that. They know that what they see is what they get. We know that the promises he made in 2016 have been kept, and he is working on keeping more. He's come through in so many ways. And so I think that's why, again, when we look at our modeling and on those issues, the president's favorability ratings are really off the charts because that means something to people, and it's very tangible.
So, Cassie, you know, there is the one issue, obviously, immigration, which was a signature issue for the president. And he has tried. I mean, it's like he's turning over every rock. He's doing everything he can, but he has really been stymied by a couple of horrible laws and court decisions and inaction on the part of the Democrats. And let's face it, the Republicans did not, you know, take advantage of the time that they were in control of all three parts of the government. They were too busy infighting and kind of really bickering over the details to get something done. And now here we have about 1,000 people a day being released into the country. And some cities are overrun. So even Democrats in charge of these cities and states are now admitting that they can't take any more, people from south of the border who are here illegally. And the president has to have some messaging on that is very clear. Now, I'm excited to see the cooperation with Mexico, but what more do you see him being able to accomplish in between now and the actual election that would be able to help kind of bolster his supporters to know that we've got to keep him there? I totally agree with you. We have to, but we have to convince voters to keep him there.
Right. Well, we know, and I believe we've talked about this before, one of the perennial issues for voters, they tell us, is immigration. And when you just put it there, they say, yep, immigration. It doesn't give us many details as to how they feel about immigration, but we know that something has to be done. The system we have is not working, and regardless of which side of the aisle they sit on, there's pretty much broad agreement on that. When you look at the opioid epidemic, when you look at even just the influx of people coming over the border and inroading towns, these are things that people are saying, there's got to be a better way. So I think the president talking about it and being the only one who's willing to take action, and breathlessly so, he's not giving up on this, that means something to people. And again, that's something that we're going to see on the debate stage or on the rally stage as something where he will be persistent in that. And I think he's going to force the conversation on it. But frankly, you see what he's been able to do with getting Mexico to put more people on their southern border. If we start to see these numbers of apprehensions start to go down at all, that right there is a little glimmer where he can say, see, something needed to be done. I used every means possible to get something done. And look, imagine what we could do if we had the support of a Congress to go in and get something done together. And you talk about how Congress has had opportunities to act in the past and they haven't on both sides of the aisle. Everyone's pretty open about that. I remember when I was on the Hill, people used to spend their days fretting about semantics. Can we say comprehensive, or does it have to be step by step? I mean, that was what they would spend their time on, because there was such a fear that just talking about it could be the end of their time in Congress. And I love that President Trump, he doesn't waste his time on poll-tested messaging. He goes out there and listens to people and says, I like that. You sound good. Let's talk about this. Let's do that. And that's how you get something done. And I think that authenticity is one of the things even people who don't love him love the most about him. I know he's telling me it's coming exactly from him. That's not from some consultant or some script. Yeah,
it's straight from the hip with the president. And so speaking of straight from the hip, you have this George Stephanopoulos interview, which was supposed to be this extravaganza. And you just started off our discussion, Cassie, with this phenomenon. The president says he's going to be in Columbia, Missouri. 30,000 people show up, and this is a rural area. Columbia, well, it's a town, it's a city, but it's like 2 hours from St. Louis. It's a couple of hours from Kansas City. It's not an easy place to get to. People drove there, they parked, they walked for miles to be near him or watch him on a screen, because there were people outside watching on screens. This happens over and over and over again. So we know that when the president is speaking or being interviewed, it's a draw. But on the Stephanopoulos thing, Americans just didn't want to hear it. And I think it's Stephanopoulos, because President Trump has a track record of being able to turn out eyeballs and ears on interviews on the radio and on television and in person.
Well, when you see that this president has had over 90% negative news coverage, why are you going to tune in to something that you know is going to be sparse and splintered and split up into sound bites? That's not what we tune in for. We tune in for the opportunity to hear directly from the president in full context, a la the rallies, or when he's stopping on his way to Marine One and you get an impromptu 45-minute press conference. That's him in full. And I think there's a distrust. I don't think. We know there's a distrust with the media. And when George Stephanopoulos, remember, this isn't a guy who went to journalism school. This is a guy who came straight out of the Clinton administration and went into media. So there is an inherent bias there that I think people say, who needs it? I can spend my time 1,000 different ways than listening to someone try and soundbite the president. And so I generally think whether it's this interview or just day-to-day with the media, the reason you're seeing the ratings go down is because people don't need to turn to those outlets to hear from the president. We have any number of opportunities to hear directly from him and in full context.
Yeah, I love that because what you're saying there, Cassie, it means something. If you know that the people who are interviewing the president hate him and want to reframe everything that he says, and they're basically playing gotcha, journalism, then it's kind of pointless to watch because you know what you see is going to be skewed and it's not going to be the open, honest truth. And I think the other thing is the president has given such an amazing amount of exposure, like you mentioned, on the way to Air Force One, outside Marine One, outside the White House period, and then in all of the rallies, which he has continued to do. For someone who's supposed to be too old to run, he has the energy of someone in their 40s who works out and speed walks the mall every night after dinner. He's out there. He's not resting on the fact that he's the president and kind of running and saying, look, incumbent wins. I got this. I think that's to be respected, but there's something kind of, I don't know. It's hard to quantify someone who works this hard even before the campaign launch and still gets the 98% negative coverage. I think Americans are sick of it. And that's part of the reason why he's probably going to be back there, in 2021. He'll still be there.
Well, from your mouth to God's ears. But yes, what we're hearing from people, going back to the rallies, people who came out in 2016 out of curiosity, but said, I didn't end up voting for him, but I just wanted to hear from him, whatever, I'm a lifelong Democrat. And then now, time and time again, most of these rallies, half the crowd, registered Democrats. These are people saying, hey, it wasn't my guy, I voted for Hillary, but I can't deny the results that I'm feeling. I'm switching my vote. I mean, the walk-away movement is real. People feel so uninspired by the Democrat candidates, but frankly, in many ways, betrayed by the Democrat Party. Their extremist positions on literally the alphabet of issues, you name it, and they have gone to the extreme, and they're so out of step. And then you've got Donald Trump saying, give me a chance. And when you have, for every single American, it's hard to find a sector of America that has not been positively impacted by the results of this administration. That's facts. And despite the fact that you don't hear that on TV, doesn't change how people are feeling in their day-to-day lives. And so to have those two out of sync means who are you going to believe, what you watch on TV or how you're feeling in your everyday life? I'm going to turn off the TV.
Yeah. I just think it was interesting that they're trying to blame President Trump for those low ratings when the fact is he sells everything out. It's an amazing ability to get people to stop what they're doing, take vacation days, whatever, walk 6 miles. I mean, I've never done that for any other, no concerts, nothing like that. I've ever had that experience. And, it just keeps happening. It's an amazing sea change of momentum that I think is really unique to his presidency. And I'm so glad to see it. You know what? I love it when you stop by. Great start to the week. Thank you for being here, Cassie Smedile, RNC Deputy Comms Director.
Thank you, Stacy. Well, I'll have to get back to another rally soon.
Yes. Maybe we'll be there together marching. Have a good one. All right. We'll be right back.
This is Uncommon Moments. Here's former Super Bowl winning NFL coach Tony Dungy and his wife Lauren sharing from their book Uncommon Marriage.
A number of years ago, Lauren and I began discussing the possibility of adding to our family by adopting. She told me she felt the Lord was speaking to her, saying, "You have the resources, you have the home and the loving family." Yet she was careful to tell me she wanted to be sure she wasn't being driven by her own desire, but by the Lord's leading.
We agreed to pray about it to make sure the Lord was speaking to both of us. In your marriage, when you come upon an important decision you feel the Lord is calling you to, go to Him in prayer and wait for His answer. He'll show you like He showed Tony and me.
Tony and Lauren Dungy, authors of Uncommon Marriage, learning about lasting love and overcoming life's obstacles together. Discover more at CoachDungy.com.
Have you ever found yourself so embarrassed in a situation that you couldn't even look a person in the eye? One day, I was in the drive-thru of a famous fast food restaurant, and I was giving my order to whom I thought was a man, but turned out to be a woman. Oh my goodness. I found that out because I said yes, sir, and she quickly corrected me. I was so embarrassed, I couldn't even finish the order, so I drove off. That was a true story of fear and embarrassment. Deuteronomy chapter 31 verse 6 says, "Be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid or terrified because of them, for the Lord your God goes with you. He will never leave you nor forsake you." My brothers and sisters, do not operate as I did and drive away due to fear creeping in. Know that the Spirit of the living God lives in you, and with Him, He can bring about that courage that you didn't even realize was already in you. With a heart for the urban family, I'm today's urban woman, Victoria Hollyfield. Connect with us more at urbanfamilytalk.com.
Donald Trump's America. President Trump has condemned Iran for its apparent attacks on oil tankers traveling through the Strait of Hormuz. The administration calls for talks and foreign cooperation. But on CBS Face the Nation, GOP Senator Tom Cotton says a military strike will send a message.
The fastest way to get the fire and fury of the U.S. military unleashed on you is to interfere with the freedom of navigation.
Cotton says he supports that, even if it means bypassing Congress. The U.S. is also taking steps to protect the 2020 election, but Democratic Congressman Adam Schiff, also on CBS, says the president has in some ways undermined that effort.
When the president a month ago told Putin over the phone that he still thinks the Russian interference in our election was a hoax.
President Trump this week will officially announce his run for re-election, but a new Fox News poll out Sunday says 5 Democratic candidates, Biden, Sanders, Warren, Buttigieg, and Harris, would beat the president one-on-one. Gernal Scott, Fox News.
You can download episodes of Stacy on the Right from the podcast page on AFR.net or UrbanFamilyTalk.com. Now, back to the show on American Family Radio and Urban Family Talk.
The very fact that in NFL, where the average salary is like $2 or $3 million, 5 years after they retire, 70% of them are bankrupt. So I'm not so sure if it doesn't work for rich people, what it's going to do for poor people. But again, Tucker, it's a distraction. There's study after study on the black communities conducted by the Joint Center for Political Economics, a liberal black think tank. When black Americans, rank and file, ask, what are the issues most important to you? It's jobs, it's security. Race only shows up 8% in those communities, in those 3 separate polls. But these people on television, the candidates, pander to the black community, assume that they don't have to speak to the legitimate needs of black America for jobs, for better health care, for neighborhoods that are not being gentrified, but instead they can just pander and walk through the civil rights door. It is pandering, it is insulting to black America, and as I have said, I have suffered my last rich, angry black and my last guilty white person.
Wow. So, let me just say that, first of all, that was Dr. Bob Woodson. He's a leader. He runs a think tank. And the comments that he's making there to Tucker Carlson about what actually happens when people who don't have any training in money management and are, poverty stricken come into large sums of money has been echoed over and over and over again. So does that mean we don't want to help people who are poverty-stricken? No. Does that mean that we don't appreciate the up-by-your-bootstraps nature of America? No. Does that mean that people who come into sums of money can't learn how to manage it? No. But the idea that the federal government just saying, okay, we're going to issue reparations and going through this complex process of kind of pulling out the people who, because I'm friends with on Facebook with a couple of people, one of whom he said, generations prior to him being alive, one of his black ancestors owned 1,500 slaves and land. His black ancestor owned other black people as slaves during the time when slavery was lawful in this country. So does he then pay reparations, or does he still get them because he's black? See, that's where we are right now, literally parsing every single person out. And if you think we're looking at each other funny in the grocery store right now, because that's what I see. I see a ton of people who smile and are very open, but I also see people who every person they're kind of looking at askance. Everyone's trying to sum everybody up. Is she a racist? You know, should I help her? I was out at the TJ Maxx in St. Peter's, and I only went there because I was out at Bible study, and it was in the same parking lot as the Home Depot. And I went to the Home Depot to get 8 bags of mulch. These are real. This is the reality of my life, you guys. The guy who does our yard maintenance, his daughter had her second child. Well, actually, I think it's her third child. And so the baby was in the hospital because she was born a couple, like three or 4 weeks early. So they were kind of busy with that. So he kind of put all of the yard jobs on hold while they were doing that. And so when my husband called to see if he could deliver our mulch, like they do every year, but it's late this year because we had all the monsoon rains that went on for like a month. And then we had to weed everything. So then we want him to come and deliver the mulch, you know, like a week ago on Saturday or Sunday or Monday. And he couldn't do it. So I went and bought some mulch for the parts that we'd weeded because I was afraid the weeds were going to come back, and I was just going to mulch those little small areas until he could get over and deliver the mulch. So I'm headed over to the Home Depot that I know is literally 3 minutes away from my friend's house. And I see that there's a TJ Maxx in the parking lot, and I have a return. I have a dress I bought that is not fitting me, and I want to, you know, return it. So I get in line at the store, and all 4, well, there are like 5 registers, but 4 of them were manned staff. There were women there working the registers. So I get up to I'm next in line, and the lady looks down. She looks right at me, and instead of waving me over or hitting a little button that says come over, she turns to the other lady and says something. I couldn't hear what it was. And then she shuts her register down and walks off. So then the next lady, her customer leaves. She looks down, looks right at me. And I have like 2 candles and a couple of other things that I'm buying, a nonstick pan and 2 workout shirts. So I have those little things, and then the one thing in a TJ Maxx bag. And I'm waiting there, and I look at her. She looks me right in the face. She shuts down her register as I'm walking up, because as soon as she looked at me, I thought, oh, she's going to help me. I start walking up, and she says, "Did you hear the thing chime?" And I said, "No, I didn't." She said, "Well, I'm not working anymore." So I turn around and walk back to the beginning of the line, and I wait. And finally, now there are 2 ladies left checking people out. The girl waves me. She hits the thing, waves me over. It chimes and says, you know, register 3 is open. I walk down and I put my stuff down. And I looked at her and she was like, "Can I help you today?" And I'm thinking, well, you don't have to help me. You just have to ring this stuff out. So I said, "Thank you." So give her the stuff. She rings me out, and she's kind of like, you know, I can tell something's not right about this situation. I'm not sure what's going on or, you know, if it has anything to do with me. But it definitely was not a good customer service experience at that TJ Maxx. Now, old Stacy would have immediately called back later and complained to the manager or, you know, whatever. But I just thought to myself, you know, so not worth my time to waste on making a phone call. But obviously there's some kind of, like, it's not the regular customer service environment where you just walk up and get served and walk on about your business. And this happens, you know, it can happen at TJ Maxx. It can happen anywhere. Now, my motto is any person that treats you like that, they're having a bad day. There's something going on in their life. They're having a problem. So you just be blessed that you're not that person and get your stuff and move on. But I'm pointing that out to say the animosity that we see between people running around just doing everyday things, the animosity, some of it's coming from people who have, quite honestly, their lives are a trash can and they're struggling and they need real help. And some of it is because of the environment that we've set up where every one of us has to gather up our demographic boxes and put a toe and a finger and a leg into each one and then walk around wearing those things like a badge of like, I'm this, I'm that. And if you're not one of those people, which I'm not, I could care less about the socioeconomics, if you're white, if you're black, whatever. I'm just looking to do whatever I'm looking to do. If I'm buying something for you, I just want to buy it and get on my way. If I'm helping you, I want to help you and get on my way. I want to just do what I need to do and move on to the next thing. But we're losing that. That's being chipped away. And the people chipping away at it are the Democrats and their useful patsies. And so when Dr. Bob Woodson points to these millionaires, these NFL guys who they start out, some of them start out from very straitened circumstances, and they come into this amazing environment, which it's really for some of them, it's like sending them into the lion's den because they're not prepared. Not only do they not know how to manage money, they don't know how to manage themselves. They don't have good personal habits. They've never had a man in their life to teach them how to be a man. And so when presented with all of the temptations and the environment that is the National Football League, they fall. They make mistakes. And it's not the kind of mistakes that, it's the kind of stuff that you're known for it afterwards. You've beaten your girlfriend up in an elevator with a camera. You've beaten up every girlfriend and wife you've ever had. You have kids with 8 different people, and you're rich. So you're like, whatever. But as you heard him say, time goes on, 5 years past their retirement from the NFL, and they're broke. Right back where they were, only they're worse off because there's nothing like living high and fine and then going back to straitened circumstances. And so the goodness of it is that, like Morgan Freeman said, we don't have a caste system here where if you're rich, you're always rich, and if you're poor, you're always poor. Here in this country, you can be poor, middle class, rich, go back to middle class. You can be poverty stricken again. It's all up to your personal choices. But we're eroding the very value of that system by making everything about race. So I'm circling back around to Morgan Freeman. He says courage is the key to life itself in this last clip. He's been asked by Don Lemon. So a little bit more time has passed since the first clip where you heard him talking about, India's caste system and how he was poor and now he's Morgan Freeman. But Don Lemon asks him, he says, don't you think race has something to do with it? Don't you think that race is a determining factor in whether or not you can make it here in America? And Morgan Freeman, he uses an expletive and says, no way, that's not true. But then he goes on to describe a couple things that it would be good for every kid in America. I don't care what your permanent tan is, for every kid in America to hear this and understand that this is the truth of the situation. And regardless of your drawbacks, your negatives, your cons, everybody's got pros, everybody's got cons. Regardless of those, anyone can make it here. It's the determination that matters. It's number 2.
Courage. Courage is the key to life itself. There are a lot of people who are born in situations where they say, I'll never get out of this. So they won't. I say to people who say, well, I would like to have done so and so and so. So, well, you could have done it. So, well, I couldn't get out of here. Man, the bus runs every day. If you can think of it, you can do it. That's the human condition. If we can imagine it, we can do it. Right. And I think that's the condition of each individual human.
Right. So can I go back to, because I thought what you said was fascinating, because you called it bull when you said people can't, pull themselves up. Do you think that race plays a part in wealth distribution, or either a mindset that you can't
today?
Or cannot? Yeah.
No.
You don't?
No, I don't. You and I, we're proof. Why would race have anything to do with it? Put your mind to what you want to do and go for that.
He says, stick your mind to what you want to do and go for that. Now, look, I understand that there are hardships, there are circumstances beyond our control, and we certainly don't have an easy road if you're trying to do anything. Remember, I was just talking about this, not last Friday, but the Friday before, where I was talking about when you're in the hashtag valley of no, where you feel like the Lord is saying, no, not right now, wait, or what have you. And I have like 3 areas where that's the case. And nothing's changed since that last Friday where I was talking about that, except a few people reached out on messaging and said, hey, God bless. And that was really a blessing to me. I'm in that same spot. Thank you that was encouraging. Other than that, nothing has changed. Nothing. And so I don't know anything more good from then or today. Nothing has changed. But my attitude has changed because I've been meditating on that information and basically saying, you know what, Lord, you're right. I'm wrong. Your timing is right. My timing is wrong. And I have to keep working. I have to keep working in order to see it through, whatever God's answer is going to be. And so when we get stuck in this staring at our skin, I call it skin worshiping, where people are just sitting around. Well, I'm a victim. Well, I'm a bigger victim than you because you're just a woman, but I'm a woman and I'm black. And then someone else is like, well, you guys are nothing because I'm gay and I'm black. So I'm a bigger victim than all y'all. What good are we doing with that? How does sitting around checking our victim status or tweeting about it or posting on Facebook about it or living like that and letting those thoughts mess up our minds, like marinate all over our brains and just degrade our ability to think and see and act and take advantage of the opportunities that are here? How does that get us anywhere? So it's not that I don't understand some of the reasoning that has been put forward by some very intelligent people who are genuinely looking for a way to close the door on the racial animus by suggesting that we have the reparations that they feel were never actually completed. I understand that there are some actually decent people who are having that conversation. But what I also understand is what Burgess Owens and Dr. Bob Woodson and so many other Black thinkers of really, like, these are people that we respect because of their intellect and their ability, their staying power and their ability to analyze and cognitively really just ascertain what would the unintended consequences be. People who can actually see a little bit forward instead of just taking everything in the moment and letting our emotions rule the day. In the end, we will never have reconciliation of any kind, because that doesn't come from checks from the government or government programs or anything like that. Even community programs, we can get along better, but true reconciliation comes from the blood, comes from us acknowledging that we're all sinners and we all need a savior, and that is available to us, and then we can move into reconciliation. For those who aren't of the mind to become Christians and to become reconciled to God first, obviously we have to rely on the law, because the law is not for the just, it's for the unjust, for the law to pick up the pieces. But in the end, I believe the reparations discussion is like Pandora's box. You open it because you want to get one thing out. And instead, all of the evils and unintended consequences and things that you never considered come pouring out on you, and you can't get that lid pried back shut. And that's what the reparations is. And I for one, am just exhausted of people trying to figure out, we're trying to figure out, well, where do you stand on this? Or where do you stand on that? And our politics is already so negative. Just imagine if we had reparations to throw into that mix. And I've had people say to me, well, so you don't want to do reparations because you're afraid of the unintended consequences, but we're owed something. No, we're not. We are Americans. We are Americans. I'll say it one more time. You are an American. Not only are you not owed anything, our duty is to God, country, and then our families. We are owed nothing. If anything, the ones who are owed something are those who've given themselves to the cause and are not being given what they were promised under their agreements with our military. Maybe they're owed something, but the rest of us are owed nothing. All right, I hear the music. You're leaving us now. God bless from the heartland. You're sticking around. OneNewsNow.com. News and information is up next.
Urban Family Talk. Urban Family Talk.
Urban Family Talk is that alternative radio network because we choose to infuse Jesus in everything we do.
We count it a blessing to be able to speak with integrity and to speak honestly on the issues.
Thank you for joining us, partnering with us, being a part of
Urban Family Talk.
Urban Family Talk.
Urban Family Talk.
Urban Family Talk, so that we can stand for the gospel.
Truth, wisdom, empowerment. Urban Family Talk, a ministry of the American Family Association.
American Family News, I'm Rusty Pugh. The Trump campaign is responding to reports of leaked internal campaign polls that show President Trump trailing behind former Vice President Joe Biden in several key battleground states. John Decker has more.
Trump campaign press secretary Kayleigh McEnany acknowledging on Fox and Friends that the campaign conducted unfavorable internal polls back in March, but maintaining that the president has improved considerably since then.
Right now, the president is leading in all 17 swing states against a defined Democrat.
The Trump campaign reportedly fired several pollsters after internal polling numbers showed that he's trailing potential Democratic challenger Joe Biden were leaked. At the White House, John Decker, Fox News.
Atheists have lost faith in their lawsuit against the parsonage allowance. Chris Woodward explains.
The decision from the Freedom from Religion Foundation comes after the Wisconsin-based organization lost its challenge at the 7th Circuit Court of Appeals. Attorney Joe Davis of Beckett, a religious liberty law firm representing several Chicago area ministers in this case, says a decision in favor of the atheist would have resulted in $1 billion in new taxes being imposed on churches and ministers across the country.
A federal court of appeals has rejected a challenge by an atheist group called the Freedom from Religion Foundation to the parsonage allowance, which is a provision of the tax code that allows churches to provide tax-free housing to their ministers to allow their ministers to live in the communities that they serve. The Freedom from Religion Foundation lost in the Court of Appeals and decided to cut their losses and not take their appeal up to the United States Supreme Court.
The unbelievers claim the parsonage allowance is unconstitutional and uniquely privileges clergy. However, Beckett says the federal tax code also covers secular employees who receive a housing allowance from an employer.
The Seventh Circuit opinion was very persuasive, very powerful on the point that the parsonage allowance does not violate the Constitution. And so I think any other lawsuit against it would be very likely to fail for exactly the same reasons that this one failed.
I'm Chris Woodward.
The head of a Christian athletic association requested a poll that would determine public support for transgender males competing against females in high school sports. Bob Kellogg has some of the results.
Steve McConkey says the Rasmussen survey determined that just 23% believe men should be able to compete in women's sports. But he says it's concerning that voters under 35 are evenly divided on the question.
They showed that the younger generations as they come up are not opposed to transgenders in sports. To the older adults, you'll see that they are more situated in a belief thinking there's two sexes.
The Guardian reported in 2016 that the International Olympic Committee decided transgender athletes should be able to compete without sex reassignment surgery. McConkey says LGBT activists use that decision to their advantage to influence the younger generation.
Well, I think the public schools definitely use the Olympic decision to get in the high schools. Definitely the public schools are at fault.
The Democrat-controlled House in May overwhelmingly voted for the Equality Act, which would force public high schools to allow transgender men to compete in women's sports, according to Breitbart News. I'm Bob Kellogg.
Boeing appears to be making progress in the fix for its MAX planes and is expressing regrets about how the situation was handled. Jenny Casola reports.
The FAA could start trials of Boeing's 737 MAX fix as early as this week. Boeing's chief executive admits the company made a mistake in how it handled a cockpit warning system. CEO Dennis Muhlenberg says the company's communication with regulators, customers, and the public was not consistent, and that's unacceptable. Muhlenberg made the comments at the Paris Air Show. He believes the 737 MAX planes will be cleared to fly again later this year. Jenny Cosola, Fox News.
MasterCard will allow transgender people to use their chosen names on credit cards, which could be different than the one found on their birth certificate or driver's license. For American Family News, I'm Rusty Pugh.
Hi, friends. There's a new show in town on Urban Family Talk, nightly, 7 p.m. Central. Join me, C.L. Bryant, as we build the bridge to conversation throughout our great nation, the greatest nation on the face of the planet, the greatest success story the world has ever known. Nightly, the C.L. Bryant Show over Urban Family Talk, 7 p.m.
She's sharp, pointed, and insightful. This is Stacy on the Right on American Family Radio and Urban Family Talk.
When President Trump kicks off his 2020 re-election campaign tomorrow night, He'll be doing it in downtown Orlando, holding a rally at the 20,000 capacity Amway Center.
Changing the asylum laws is an imperative. Building the wall is an imperative. Putting more officers and agents on the ground, that is an imperative, in getting judges and resources.
Take a look at the Democrats, though. They're walking away from Obamacare and saying, well, that wasn't enough. Now they want to do Medicare for all, which would eliminate 180 million Americans' private health insurance that they like.
And now, Stacy Washington.
Oh, yeah. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Thank you so much for being with us today. We have even more fantastic show for you right now. We have Rita Dunaway. She's going to join us next segment. She is a constitutional attorney, author, and national legislative strategist for the COS Project. She has this new poll out saying that only 25% of Americans believe Congress will address major issues facing the nation, which we know they're stuck in gridlock. We know they're not going to do anything. So she's going to join us to talk about that poll. And we have a lot. I have a lot that carried over from last hour that I need to get to. So first off, let's get to this breaking Supreme Court today announced that they're not going to rule on another wedding cake lawsuit by the gay people, which, by the way, you might be thinking to yourself, you want to have, a gay bake shop make you a pro-life cake or a, heterosexual marriage cake, whatever. Feel free to go ask them to. You'll get denied, but double standards persist. So, back in Oregon in 2015, they fined Christian baker Sweet Cakes by Melissa a whopping $135,000 for refusing to make a gay wedding cake for a lesbian couple. And today, instead of issuing a ruling, the Supreme Court vacated the lower court ruling and sent the case back to the lower courts in light of the Masterpiece Cake Shop ruling. Now, I can see why they would do this on the one hand, but they're basically saying is we need to give this lower court a chance to rule properly in light of the Masterpiece Cake Shop ruling. The only issue is they've already demonstrated that they have animus towards people who have sincerely held religious beliefs. So it doesn't matter if they send it back. They're not going to. Now, hopefully the lower court will find differently. But my thought is they're going to be on the same kind of rampage that they've been executing towards Mr. Phillips, where they've literally been just persecuting him. Every time he turns around, there's somebody new at his door trying to get him to bake a cake that they know he's not going to bake. I mean, that's every single week almost for this man. And then they bring a lawsuit and then he's back in court. And of course he's got great representation, but that's not the point. Okay. So then I also had, and we're going to get to, did we listen to number 2, Courage is the Key to Life Itself? We did. From yeah, we did. So we're going to be talking about Iran's unprovoked attacks warranting a retaliatory military strike, and also the unreliable nature of solar and wind making electricity more expensive. And this is something that liberals have told us over and over again. If we just do solar and wind, that will make electricity cheaper for everyone. Well, it turns out that's just not true. So first, let's talk about these weapons of mass destruction. U.S. troops have found nearly 5,000 abandoned chemical weapons in Iraq between the years 2004 and 2011. Now, remember, that spans 2 presidencies. So you got some Bush years and you got some Obama years there. So, I'm sorry, what is the reason why we haven't just told everybody about this? American troops finding nearly 5,000 abandoned chemical weapons in Iraq from 2004 and 2011. These findings were kept secret by the U.S. government, and this is reporting by the New York Times. According to the 10,000-word, 8-part interactive report called The Secret Casualties of Iraq's Abandoned Chemical Weapons, and it was authored by C.J. Chivers and published in the paper's website late on Tuesday, at least 17 American service members and 7 Iraqi police officers were exposed to nerve or mustard agents in Iraq after the year 2003. On at least 6 occasions, American troops and American-trained Iraqi troops were wounded by the abandoned munitions. But news of the encounters was neither shared publicly nor widely circulated among the troops, and the troops were ordered to be vague or deceptive about what was found. Jared Lampier, who's a retired Army major, said his discovery of the 2006 of 2,400 nerve agent rockets at a former Republican Guard compound was the largest chemical weapons discovery of the war. and he was ordered to say he found nothing of significance. The paper also published heavily redacted intelligence documents obtained under the Freedom of Information Act. Now, what you might be wondering, why would they be secretive about this? Well, the discoveries of these chemical weapons did not support the government's invasion rationale. After the terrorist attacks of September 11th, 2001, President Bush insisted that Saddam Hussein was hiding an active weapons cache, which was a mass destruction program, and that he was doing so in defiance of international will and at the risk of basically every nation on the planet. UN inspectors said they couldn't find any evidence to support those claims by the Bush administration. So the discovery of pre-Gulf War chemical weapons, most of them filthy, rusty, or corroded, did not fit the narrative. They needed something to say that after September 11th, Saddam used chemical rounds, and all of this was from the pre-1991 era. And so this is where I get ticked off, because are you saying that even because they were rusty, they still couldn't hurt people? Because they certainly didn't not hurt American troops and Iraqi troops because they were old and from pre-1991. The fact is, he still could have dropped those munitions on unsuspecting civilians or military from other countries. And even though the damage wouldn't have been as effective as it would have been were they brand new, it still would have harmed people. And the fact is, he still had WMD. So because we're talking about semantics, pre-1991 to post-1991, we had to keep it a secret and act as if the reason and rationale for waging the war was flawed, when it was just, we're talking details here. Are the weapons of mass destruction fresh new ones, or are they old ones that he could still use to some harm and detriment to others? He says, Jared L. Taylor, a former Army sergeant, told the paper, "I love it when I hear, oh, there weren't any chemical weapons in Iraq. There were plenty." Yeah, there were plenty. The troops began encountering the munitions in hidden caches and roadside bombs. The paper recounted a harrowing 2004 discovery in Baghdad by two explosives disposal technicians in detail. They'd actually been exposed to sarin gas because they basically picked up some munitions to take back for proper disposal. They didn't realize they contained sarin gas. They began to feel the effects immediately. They were sickened. And then they were put under a gag order not to talk about it. The security detail, the clinic that treated them, and them, they were even briefed to tell their family members that they were exposed to industrial chemicals, and they classified the case of them finding these sarin gas weapons as top secret. Also, as a result of the secrecy that was forced on these troops, military doctors were not prepared to treat the soldiers exposed to chemicals, preventing troops from receiving proper medical care and official recognition of their wounds because, they could have gotten decoration and service medals, and also acknowledgement of their exposure to sarin gas would put them in a class of veterans benefits where their aftercare, their care post-service after they've separated from the military, would involve the U.S. government helping to continue to pay for them to, basically be treated, because this is a lifelong affliction that they're now dealing with. So I'm very disappointed. And I know I rail against the U.S. government. I rail against liberals. I talk about it, and I take none of it back. I apologize for nothing. This isn't that. If you're getting your ears perked up for that, sit down. That's not what I'm about to do here. But I am disappointed that U.S. service members who have written an oath, they've taken an oath to give their very bodies and their lives in service to this country, were told to lie about what they were exposed to because it didn't fit a narrative. The truth is, if they'd been allowed to speak honestly about what they experienced, then the American media would have had to deal with the fact that while they didn't have the fresh new weapons of mass destruction, they still had weapons of mass destruction. And many, many millions of dollars in false advertising by the Democrats about how Bush lied and people died wouldn't have been able to have been shared. Not only that, the lying. Let's get down to the core issue here. Forcing our troops to lie about what they saw, classifying information that didn't need to be classified, and forcing these men to go without treatment that they deserved to serve a narrative. Disappointed. very disappointed in our U.S. government and the people who made these decisions. And once again, another case of those in a position of authority making decisions that they'll never be held accountable for. Well, maybe not here. Maybe they get away with this here. But we know that God is just, and they will have to answer for the lies they forced others to tell and the things that they did surrounding these. It's not one case, it's cases of American troops who were exposed to this. It's just wrong. Absolutely unacceptable. And I feel really, it's disappointing. It's not that I think that U.S. military leadership is perfect or that they can't make mistakes, but this to me is a dereliction of duty. There should be people court-martialed. Rear Admiral John Kirby, who's a spokesman for Defense Secretary Chuck Hagel, declined to address specific incidents detailed in the Times investigation, but said that the military's healthcare system and awards practices are under review. I think people should be court-martialed. People should be stripped of their retirement benefits and their rank. And people should be held to account, meaning no secrets, no getting to do it behind closed doors. How about if they're held accountable in public, the way these troops have to suffer in public, but don't get to say why? They have all of these symptoms and these long-lasting, debilitating diseases from being exposed to chemical weapons, while they were justly discharging their service to this nation that they swore an oath to do. Unbelievable. All right. So I want to hear from Senator Cotton. He's talking about Iran's unprovoked attacks and what we could do in response. Of course, liberals' heads have literally popped off like Barbie dolls under the tutelage of an angry toddler. And it's just hilarious to see them getting so upset when we've done this so many times before. It's number 4.
Well, Iran for 40 years has engaged in this kind of attacks, going back to the 1980s. In fact, Ronald Reagan had to reflag a lot of vessels going through the Persian Gulf and ultimately take military action against Iran in 1988. These unprovoked attacks on commercial shipping warrant a retaliatory military strike. We can make a military response in a time and in a manner of our choosing, but yes, unprovoked attacks on commercial shipping warrant a retaliatory military strike against the Islamic Republic of Iran. Going back to President Washington and all the way down to President Trump, the fastest way to get the fire and fury of the U.S. military unleashed on you is to interfere with the freedom of navigation on the open seas and in the air. That's exactly what Iran is doing, and one of the world's most important strategic choke points. The president has the authorization to act to defend American interests. Certainly, it would be in keeping with what President Obama did unwisely in Libya in 2011 in launching a weeks-long campaign to overthrow the government there. What I'm talking about is not like what we've seen in Iraq for the last 16 years or Afghanistan for the last 18 years, but retaliatory military strikes against Iran that make it clear we will not tolerate any kind of attacks on commercial shipping on the open seas.
So what's so interesting about this is if it was Barack Obama, they'd all be throwing up their little fake, the little dance that they do where they make their hand go in a circle and then jerk to one side. You see it all over social media and everyone's doing it. It's like they're having epileptic seizures. Everybody would be doing that little dance with their hands and going, Barack Obama, he's like, he drops the mic. He drops bombs. He does this. He does that. He doesn't take any prisoners. No one pushes him around. Barack Obama, he's the drone king. He's the drone president. That's the way they used to talk about him. So no matter that he was droning the garbage out of people in foreign countries, some of them American citizens, without giving them due process, they were just excited that it was a Democrat and he wasn't being a softy on war. When he wasn't wearing high-waisted mom jeans and tossing a ball like a girl, he was droning people into oblivion, and they were just like, we'll take it. We'll take whatever we can get from this guy. But Tom Cotton comes out and says, we might light him up, and everybody on the left is losing their mind. They're interfering with commercial shipping operations. Of course we're going to light them up. I mean, are we already not lighting them up? Like, I can't believe we're talking about it. When we get back, we'll have Rita Dunaway. Stay there.
Like, I wanted to have the abortion because I was trying to hide the situation.
When a young mom in crisis walks into a preborn pregnancy center, she's welcomed with open arms and given love, support, and a free ultrasound to meet her unborn baby. This young woman not only chose life for her baby, but heard the message of Jesus Christ and was comforted from the guilt and pain that plagued her. Preborn centers lead the nation in providing free ultrasounds. When an abortion-minded woman sees her baby on ultrasound, she's 80% more likely to choose life for her baby. For $140, you can sponsor 5 ultrasounds, and 100% of your sponsorship goes towards saving babies. To find out more, go to preborn.com. That's preborn.com, or dial pound 250 and say the keyword baby. That's pound 250 and say baby. Your love can save a life.
This is Viewpoints with Kirby Anderson.
Earlier this month, various news outlets reported that a 17-year-old Dutch girl was put to death through euthanasia because she had been battling the trauma of childhood sexual abuse and subsequent rape. Days later, the same news outlets were focusing on the fact that they erroneously had reported that her death was due to legal euthanasia in the Netherlands. Actually, her death was a decision she made with her family to starve herself to death. The debate about the reporting overshadowed the more important question of why she chose to die. She had been sexually assaulted at age 11 and then was raped 3 years later. Because of that trauma, she suffered from PTSD, depression, and eating disorders. All of this was tragic, from the original trauma right up to her decision to die. Because she lived in the Netherlands, reporters naturally assumed she ended her life due to the liberal euthanasia laws in that country. I recently spoke in Europe about the impact these laws have had in that country and how similar laws are now being found in the United States. Physician-assisted suicide is available now to 1 in 5 Americans. At the same time, we're also learning what many of us predicted would take place with the legalization of euthanasia. Oxford researchers found that in states where physician-assisted suicides were legal, there was an increase in total suicides. And more recent Dutch study came to a similar conclusion, finding that legalized euthanasia for psychiatric patients actually contributes to a rise in their numbers. I'm not surprised. If you legalize something, you get more of it. Make drugs legal, more people will try drugs. Make physician-assisted suicide legal, more people will try suicide. We know the history of the Netherlands and of the U.S. states that have legalized euthanasia. Legislators and policymakers need to pay attention. I'm Kirby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For a free copy of Kirby's booklet, A Biblical View on Anti-Semitism, go to viewpoints.info/anti-Semitism. Viewpoints.info/anti-Semitism.
This is Stacy on the Right with Stacy Washington on American Family Radio and Urban Family Talk.
Hello, friends. I'm back, and I'm so excited to have our next guest on the program, Rita Dunaway, constitutional attorney, author, national legislative strategist for the Convention of States Project. Rita, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be with you.
Yeah, so you've got this new poll out saying that only 25% of Americans believe Congress will address major issues facing the nation. I can't believe that a quarter of Americans even believe that. We kind of know they're not going to be doing anything, don't we?
Yes, we do. And, you know, it's so interesting that in a day and age when we are so divided politically, and, you know, we talk a lot about how polarized we are as a nation, this is one thing that people agree about, is that Congress is not going to fix the biggest issues, the biggest problems we have with our government. But, you know, I have to point out what I find so interesting is that in polling done across America in a number of states, 66% of Americans agree that we should have a convention of states in order to resolve some of these issues that Congress is not going to fix. So there again is something that no matter which party you identify with, no matter where you are in the political spectrum, there are a few things that we agree on, and they're pretty important things.
Okay, so one of the things that I find interesting about the Convention of States movement, and I believe I've interviewed Mark on another radio station when I was guest hosting or something like that. And so we've had a couple of discussions about this. And one of the chief kind of dissenters to this idea, someone who really honestly was very, very well respected and had a wealth of information on this topic, was Phyllis Schlafly, and she was completely opposed to the idea of a convention of states. So what is the response to the concerns that she had about how it would be a runaway type of affair, and that once started, the liberals would, hijack the entire convention of states and really push through a bunch of things that we're currently fighting in the courts right now?
Yeah, well, I have to say, first of all, I have the greatest respect for Phyllis Schlafly. She was an amazing patriot and did so much good for our country. But sadly, on this issue, it seems to me what happened was Mrs. Schlafly relied on just some bad information that was actually really common around the time that she was looking into the issue. And essentially what happened was, it was around the time after the Supreme Court handed down the Roe versus Wade decision that some of the states started to look into this Article 5 convention process as a way to reverse the Roe versus Wade precedent. And so that was the time that it really piqued interest among the states. So not surprisingly, a lot of the liberal scholarship that was done at that point was used to really dissuade conservatives from using the process. And in fact, one of the letters that Mrs. Schlafly frequently cited in her opposition was by a liberal Supreme Court justice who was part of the majority in that Roe versus Wade decision. And so, of course, he would dissuade her from using it and paint this picture of, the runaway convention and all of that. But the good news is there has been great scholarship done on this topic within this past decade or so. The most recent is a book by Professor Rob Nadelson, The Law of Article 5. And the truth is, in American history, there has never been a runaway convention. We actually have a very rich history of the states meeting in convention process to work out different issues. And there has never been a convention where the state delegations exceeded their authority and did something they weren't authorized to do.
Well, and so that's a valid observation, speaking of what's happened in the past. But I think you would agree, Rita, that the current lay of the land is that anything that liberal states or groups of liberals want to get accomplished, when they can't get it done at the legislative ballot box by electing people to pass it into legislation at the state level or at Congress, they simply resort to the courts, which they've activated through years of appointing liberal activist judges to positions all over the country. And they have certain courts that they like to go to repeatedly to get the rulings that they like. And these rulings have resulted in, really dastardly decisions that have been made that are currently harming us in this moment. And so Roe v. Wade being one of them, obviously, my primary issue, the primary voting issue for me is the pro-life one. But there are other issues that cascade from there. And all of these, you can trace them back to an activist judge who had a liberal agenda that they were accomplishing. And so I don't see how a constitutional convention in an environment like that, where we could expect liberal states to abide by whatever the parameters are for Article 5. And you spoke of a liberal Supreme Court justice. What I'm looking at here in front of me is a comment from Justice Antonin Scalia, hardly a liberal, condemning the proposals for an Article 5 convention as a horrible idea just months before he unexpectedly passed away. So he was actually with Phyllis Schlafly in opposing this idea.
Well, let me make a distinction, and this is actually a really common misconception, so I'm glad that you brought it up and I have a chance to speak to it. The Convention of States Project is not advocating for a constitutional convention. We are absolutely on the same page with Justice Scalia. We would not want to see our great Constitution rewritten at this point in time, and it doesn't need to be rewritten. What we are advocating for is an Article 5 convention to propose amendments to the Constitution, and the reason we're advocating for that is precisely what you just pointed out. Right now, anyone can look and see Congress is sending our nation into a fiscal crisis. The most significant laws of our day and age are made by courts who have no legitimate authority to make law or set public policy. And then we've got laws and effective statutes and regulations being written by unelected bureaucrats. And so the only way that we can correct that situation is through this Article 5 convention process. That's the only way we're going to see those bad, overreaching court precedents ever reversed. That's the only way we're going to see a return to a proper historical interpretation of parts of the Constitution that have been so abused, like the General Welfare Clause, the Commerce Clause, the Necessary and Proper Clause. It's going to take constitutional amendments to set things straight, and it's going to take the states joining together to do it, because Congress will never do it on its own.
So, Rita, you mentioned the difference between a constitutional convention and an Article 5 convention. What is the difference?
Mm-hmm. Well, there's only been one constitutional convention, and that was the one in Philadelphia in 1787 that wrote the Constitution that we have today. And despite a common misconception, the delegations to the Constitutional Convention were empowered by their states to do that. The states knew that there were serious problems and shortcomings with the Articles of Confederation, so the states sent their delegates there to work out a better plan for governing the Union. So that's the Constitutional Convention. An Article 5 convention is a convention that's called specifically pursuant to the terms and prescriptions in Article 5 of the Constitution, and it can only propose amendments to the Constitution we already have. So the Article 5 convention process just gives the state the same power that Congress has every day it sits in session to propose amendments for the states to consider.
Okay, so we're talking about Article 5 of the Constitution. And so, again, the concern that I've seen so many different places is that this would then enable liberals to offer up an amendment to the Constitution, and they would be able to offer up the elimination of the southern border, for instance, which is an obsession of theirs, or enshrining, enshrining abortion and further enshrining it into the Constitution by making it impossible for states to limit abortion. So how does that not happen under the scenario that you're describing with an Article 5 convention?
Great question. There are a number of protections and limitations on the Article 5 convention process. The first one is that in order to trigger this whole Article 5 convention, the state legislatures have to agree on what is essentially the agenda for the convention. And so what they do is the state legislatures, 2/3 of them, which is 34 states today, have to pass a resolution applying for a convention to consider and propose amendments on a certain topic. So the delegates that go to the convention are limited to the topic that the states agreed needed to be discussed. So to give you a concrete example of that, the effort that I'm a part of, the Convention of States Project, the resolution that we are trying to get passed, which has already been passed in 15 states as of today, calls for a convention to propose amendments that do three things: impose fiscal restraints on Washington, limit the power and jurisdiction of the federal government, and set term limits on federal officials. So that right away defines the outer boundaries of what can even be discussed at the convention. Then the second protection is that the delegates who go, or commissioners rather, who go to represent the state legislatures at the convention, they act as legal agents of the state legislatures. They're not just going out on their own to make their own decisions at the convention about what amendment proposals would be useful. they are bound to abide by the will of their state legislature, which typically gets expressed in formal written instructions that the state legislatures give. And then finally, and this really is the biggest protection on the process, according to the terms of Article 5 itself, any amendments that are proposed by this convention have to then go back to the states and be ratified by 38 states. That's 3/4 of the states. So that is a huge hurdle, and it really guarantees that only amendment proposals that are supported by the vast majority of the American people will ever become part of our Constitution.
Okay, so thank you for that explanation. But after hearing the high threshold for passage of any of these proposed amendments, and the three that you outlined are fantastic. Those ideas are great. I agree with them. It sounds like Tea Party, 202, not 101, but 202. But there's no way that Illinois, California, New York, Oregon, Washington State, and so many others, like we don't have 3/4 of the states willing to pass or accept constitutional amendments like the ones you've described. We have a lot of liberal states that not only don't want to see government limited, they want to see the government completely take over because their states are poorly run and they're already suffering from, malaise from them enacting socialism and higher taxes, et cetera. They're suffering from population loss. There's no way they would agree to that. So what is the point of spending all the time to get a constitutional or Article 5 convention going when in the end we can't get 3/4 of the states to ratify the three proposals that you've brought forward?
Well, this is really, I think, where the polling comes in and is so relevant, because if there's one thing that the vast majority of the American people, whether they're Republicans or Democrats, can agree on, it's that Washington is broken and things are not working well there. So while you may be a liberal and may disagree with the majority of the red states on specifically what the public policy should be that governs you, you may still be able to agree that you would rather have the bulk of public policy that governs you be coming from your state government rather than handed down from on high in Washington. So if you're living in Illinois, you may not agree with the public policy that, say, Texans or Oklahomans would like to see passed. But you may very well, especially in the age of the Trump administration, you may very well be able to agree that you would rather have your Illinois state legislature deciding the bulk of the public policies that actually touch upon your daily life. So that's really the beautiful thing, I think, about this whole process, is that it's not about liberal or conservative policy. It's about self-governance. The best governing decisions are the ones made closest to home. And that was a right that our founding fathers believed in and provided for us to have in our Constitution. And so what we're trying to do is to really get back to that and put the federal government back in its limited constitutional box.
So it sounds fantastic, but I think if it's one thing that I've learned since the Obama years, since the beginning of his administration and now afterwards, it's that any process that has rules and parameters or, any kind of strictures around it, anything that has a process, that there's a way to subvert that process, and that if anyone will find it, it's liberals. And I think while I agree with it in principle that it would be wonderful to have this process and to have Americans engaged in this way, I don't see anything starting, beginning, and ending that would yield these kind of results that liberals couldn't find a way to completely upend to get what they want out of it. But I do hope that we can have more conversations around it and learn more about it. Rita Dunaway, constitutional attorney, author, national legislative strategist for the Convention of States Project. Thank you for your time today and your expertise.
Thank you so much.
All right. Talk to you again soon. Have a great week. All right, you guys. You can call in. We'll be back with more after this.
Back to Genesis with Dr. John Morris, scientist and president of the Institute for Creation Research. Dr. Morris, is it true that the Archaeopteryx was the transition between reptiles and birds?
Chris, it's very popular to say these days that dinosaurs evolved into birds, but this doesn't square with the evidence. Evolutionists claim the ancestor of the birds is Archaeopteryx, a fossil with some features of dinosaurs and some of birds. Now, even though I would question their claim about Archaeopteryx, it's still dated at 30 million years older than the dinosaur. Obviously, the dinosaurs were not its ancestor. Even most evolutionists have given up on Archaeopteryx. It looks like they were separate right from the start. Of course, that's what the Bible says. Back in Genesis, we read that birds were created on day 5 of creation week and land animals like dinosaurs on day 6. Evolution has it backwards.
To learn more about creation, get our free DVD called That's a Fact. Call us at 800-628-7640 and mention the promo code FACT.
This is Kay Arthur. Are you hungry for love? Unconditional love, because unconditional is what you need. You've blown it, made a mess of life, and deep inside you wonder if anyone could love you the way you are. God does, and that's why God let his only son, Jesus Christ, die on a cross almost 2,000 years ago. Jesus died for you because God knew you would fail to measure up. That's how much God loves you. The Bible, God's book, says while you were a sinner, a person who failed and missed God's standard, Jesus died for you. But that's not all. God raised Jesus from the dead. Because Jesus lives forever, you can too. If you want unconditional love, dear one, and a new start on life, call 888-NEED-HIM. Let me repeat that. If you would like to speak to someone right now about beginning a personal relationship with Jesus Christ, call 888-NEED-HIM.
This is Poll Paris with Fox News Director of Polling, Dana Blanton.
Enthusiasm is up and fear is down. I'm talking about how people would react if Donald Trump wins in 2020 compared to 2016. Our new Fox News poll finds the number of voters saying they would be enthusiastic if Trump wins is up 8 points. Now, most of that bump comes from Republicans. Their enthusiasm is up 18 points. Overall, 36% would be enthusiastic or pleased if President Trump is reelected. On the other hand, half, 50%, would be either displeased or scared. The number saying scared is down 16 points. On voting, a majority says they'll place greater importance on supporting a candidate who shares their views on issues than one who is highly ethical. Check out this partisan gap. Republicans strongly prefer, by a 42-point margin, a candidate who shares their views over one who is highly ethical. Democrats put ethics over issues by 6. I'm Dana Blanton, and that's your Poll Paris.
You can watch a live stream of the show on Facebook or YouTube at Stacy on the Right. Now, back to the show on American Family Radio and Urban Family Talk.
He was in Moscow in November 2013. He met with a journalist and...
Well, she's a poor journalist, but anyway, she became famous because of Putin is her godfather.
Okay, Putin is a godfather. Okay.
She's also known as a person who provides girls for escort for oligarchs, and she met with Trump and she brought him one-hour Russian girl, celebrity Olga Buzova, who also known as a person with a strange reputation.
Olga, and how do you spell her name?
Olga Buzova.
And what's the nature of the compromise?
Well, there were pictures of naked Trump.
Mm-hmm. And so Putin was made aware of the availability of the compromising material?
Yes, of course.
Thank you very much. We will be back in touch with you through our staff to make arrangements to obtain these materials for our committee and for the FBI, and I appreciate you reaching out to us.
So, this is literally Adam Schiff, a recording of him, some dudes named Krasenstein were pranking him, offering him fake information. He thought it was real though. So they basically pranked him. They punked him. They told him that they had compromising information on then candidate Donald Trump, and that they would kompromat, which is the Russian word for compromising information. They said they had it. They would give it to him. He said he would take it and review it with the Democrats and then possibly forward it on to the FBI. And he wanted to know what it was. So if the Democrats are so against taking information from foreign governments or foreigners, bad information or compromising information about Americans, then what was Adam Schiff doing? What was he doing? Oh, that's right. Because when Hillary Clinton is getting money from foreign governments to speak, it's fine. When she's selling 20% of our uranium, it's fine. When her husband is getting paid to speak, fine. When we have President Obama winging his way over to Italy because of compromising information that's come out about Italian government linked up with ours doing bad stuff, fine. When John Kerry said, he basically shadowed the president, went all over the world, he and Obama went and spoke to world leaders after President Trump had been with them, undoing everything President Trump had been doing, and not one Democrat said anything about it. They were fine with it. Because if the damaging information is coming from Russia and it's about Donald Trump, well, that's a dossier. That's something you can use to get FISA warrants so you can spy on Donald Trump. But if it's information about Hillary Clinton, well, anybody who would receive that information without first calling the FBI, that's treason. That's, so, you know, do you see what's happening here? I want to be perfectly clear that we all know opposition research happens. That's how the dossier was created. It's an opposition research document. I told you I've worked on a campaign before. We had a big, thick 3.5-inch binder from the day the guy graduated from high school, and every bit of information that could be found from anywhere. And it was all like categorized from very reliable. And then if it was reliable, at the end of that section, it would have all of the links where you could find, like if you could go online and find it, or if it was a New York Times story, or, you know, if there was someone who had given the information, their name and information, you know, so you could contact them and ask them again. Or it would have information in there and it would say, not reportable, not to be used in talking points, on background only, meaning this is something someone told us. We don't have anything to bolster it. We don't have any corroboration. We can't prove this is true. We have a reliable source that we like, but we don't have any other supporting information. And what you'd have to do is you'd have to say, okay, so this informs the candidate about their opposing, their opponent, but it's not something you'd bring up in a debate. So if we know that that happens, because it's not like I went on that campaign and that was the first opposition research book ever known to man. These have been around since there have been campaigns. The point is that Democrats feel that opposition research is warranted when it's on Republicans, and when it's on Democrats, it's treason and it's a reason for them to spy on you. That's what it boils down to. Like, I wish that wasn't the case. I wish it was a genuine desire for them to see bad information coming from foreign governments go through the FBI, but that's not it at all. They don't care anything about keeping information that's about Donald Trump out of the main public eye. Look what they did with BuzzFeed. NBC bought BuzzFeed, and then shortly after they bought it, BuzzFeed issues the dossier because they could use BuzzFeed because BuzzFeed didn't have a good reputation. It was a place where you go to find cat videos and cat memes. And occasionally, you know, a political article that might be something that could seed the ground to get picked up by some larger news outlet. They just wanted to get the dossier out into the atmosphere so they could validate it. Once that was done, then they could say, okay, now we can take items from the dossier and compile them into a document that would still be sourced from the dossier. The dossier is the source document, but this new document has the weight of having, you know, it was published at, this information was also published at BuzzFeed. So now it's been sourced twice. See how they created their own secondary sourcing? And then they took that to the FISA court. Now you would think that the FISA court would look at that and say, so you have a dossier and then you have a BuzzFeed article and then you have this thing that y'all wrote. Basically, you wrote Cribs notes of those two items and that gets you a FISA warrant. It seems like some judge at that level would have been like, no. And don't come back to me with this. This is spying on an American. But no, the judge was like, yeah, you know, you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours. Do it. Do it. I mean, what harm could come from it? Just do a little listening. It can't hurt. If he hasn't done anything wrong, he shouldn't mind. You ever heard that before? Wasting, what 40 million taxpayer dollars and all this time? And we're sitting up here, we're still talking about it. And we all know the dossier is nothing. It's a garbage document. Take all the worst gossip people said about you in high school or college or your last job, wherever, and get somebody to write it out and put it in a binder and, save it as a PDF and email it around the country a couple times, then get some obscure blog to pick it up. And then you have what we just saw as the validation for surveilling the president of the United States when he was a candidate. I mean, you just can't make this stuff up. All right. So, I don't know if you guys saw that. So Joe Biden, he had made one of his little events. He said, "This is not a Trump rally," and so people are cracking wise about it and talking about how it's not a Trump rally because there aren't 100,000 people waiting to attend. And that, sometimes when you hear that, you think to yourself, how sometimes when you're talking about crowds or groups of people doing something, you'll say like, oh, it was like 100,000 people. Like I heard tell that they're guesstimating that there were 500,000 people down at Keener Plaza last weekend celebrating the Blues win. And the aerial photos seem to support it. And that's based on other parades we've seen downtown for different events, like when the Cardinals won the World Series, about 500,000 people dressed in red flooded downtown. And so, you can compare the shots of those two events and, basically this many people on these streets filling it up from side to side, front to back. That's about this many hundreds of thousands of people. But when you say there's not 100,000 people waiting to attend, you think to yourself, give or take 25,000. It could really just be 75,000. It's 100,000 people waiting. They're ready to get down in Orlando. And here in St. Louis, we had two huge parties on Friday evening for the Trump launch. It was basically happy birthday, Donald Trump, and then Trump launch parties. Now, I didn't go to either one of them because it was Friday evening. And I'm just going to tell y'all, can we just get real for a second? Sometimes we get real and I tell y'all things that I hadn't really planned on sharing, but let me just tell y'all. I've been working out. And the person who's been putting me through my paces, you're probably thinking I'm going to say a personal trainer. No, it's our oldest daughter. She runs track in college, and so she has these summer workouts that she has to do. And I've been going to the gym with her. And let me just say, there's a difference between her little 19-year-old self and myself. Okay? It has been unbelievable. So Friday evening, I knew I had a workout to do on Saturday and had done one on Friday. And I was like, I'm in. I did not go out. In fact, Friday night, I knew that there was a party and I'd been invited to both of them. There were two parties. I'd been invited and I did not leave this house, y'all. I didn't leave this house because you know how it is when you first start working out? You get past the first initial stage where your body is literally screaming at you, what are you doing? Stop. And that's every part of your body. Even your fingers are sore. Like last weekend, even my hands and my fingers were sore from holding the little, you know how you hold the bar and you do the squats and you lift the bar up over your head. All the names of these exercises I used to know when I was in my 20s. Now my daughter knows them. And she says, okay, now we're doing whatever these things are. And then I do them and I'm literally sweat's pouring off and I'm just thinking to myself, please don't let me die. Yeah, that's what's happening. So Friday evening, I did not only not make it to any parties, I was just so grateful that I could feel my hands and my ankles and I was in a mildly not painful situation. So I didn't go. But they were well attended and apparently people really had a good time. And I'm only like just a little teeny, like maybe 4% of me wishes that I'd been there and the rest of me is just glad I was at home and I wasn't in pain. So these ideas, like they have this big blow up blimp. It's called Baby Donald John Trump. And it's a balloon that they like to blow up. And they flew it in London when he was there for his state visit with the Queen and the Prime Minister there in Great Britain. And it will be in attendance. Like they love blowing it up and putting it out there. But you know what the problem is? The Baby Donald John Trump, the balloon, the Baby Trump balloon, it's kind of cute. It's actually like maybe some Trump supporters should get one because apparently you can buy it. And stretch a t-shirt over it, because it's sizable, but nothing is impossible. This is America. You want a big, huge blimp-sized t-shirt with Make America Great Again on it, all you got to do is put that on the internet and somebody will give you a quote. You will have a t-shirt in your little hot hands within 72 hours. I think they should blow it up and put a Make America Great Again t-shirt on it and intentionally fly it as one of the new fun things that you can see and get your picture taken with at Trump rallies. 100,000 people plus baby Trump blimps and t-shirts. I see it. I see it happening. Somebody out there who's listening to this show who is an entrepreneur, you're welcome for that great idea. You're welcome. Get that t-shirt together, and also the baby blimp, the baby Trump blimp. So they've been getting really, like, they get so excited because they think that when they're flying that blimp, it's like hurting Donald Trump. Well, which of the 4,868 candidates on the Democratic side have ever had a baby blimp of themselves created and sold online and flown all over the world, in London, other countries, and in the United States? Please, I'll just wait for anybody who knows who's. Oh, I'm sorry. No, none of them are that famous. None of them are over the target. None of them are hated well enough to have their own baby blimp. Yeah, the idea here is to mock him and make him look bad, but the fact is, there's just not nobody else is getting this kind of treatment. Like, nobody hated Hillary Clinton enough, and there was a lot of hate. There was a lot of hatred for her. No one hated her enough to make her into a balloon, a cute balloon, with just a diaper on, and a cell phone, and a snarly looking face and blonde hair. Like, this is America right here. So I think, yeah, Joe Biden's right when he says there weren't 100,000 people there. Good for him. Good for him for noticing that. Good for him for noticing that he'll never have 100,000 people for him rallying anywhere. And also good for him for having the dubious honor of following behind Hillary Clinton as a candidate that the media doesn't have enough confidence in for him to have his own poll numbers come out. They got to make stuff up for him. Isn't that embarrassing for him? Well, I mean, it would be embarrassing for him if he knew how to be embarrassed about anything, but this is a man who sniffs the hair of other people's wives in public while cameras are rolling, and also massages the shoulders of young girls and tells them they're pretty. So maybe he doesn't have the ability to be embarrassed. I don't know. So, before we go, I have a couple things to say for the liberals and the haters. First of all, happy Monday to you. Donald Trump is still your president, and God is still King of all, Lord of all, and on the throne. And we Christians are still geeked out about it. How about that? And then, of course, there's news out of Jerusalem. They're naming a freshly new built part of the Golan Heights after President Donald John Trump. It's going to be called Ramat Trump Heights. I hear your heads popping off. I'm sorry, guys. Oh, but I'm not sorry. You can tell I'm enjoying that just a little bit too much. Yes. So that's the show for today. Y'all enjoy. Have a fantastic evening. God bless. Be back with you tomorrow.